Hey everybody, this is the Sliders Review, and I'm here today to talk to you about who was the best Randy Meeks knockoff in the Scream franchise. So, Randy Meeks, we haven't really truly saw him since the third movie when he recorded that message for Sydney. And the last time he was alive was Scream 2. However, we did see that photograph of him in Scream 5. Now, Randy is a very beloved character, and still to this day, many fans, such as myself, are pissed off that he is dead. Because he's one of those characters that is extremely funny, but we really don't know nothing about him other than he had a huge crush on Sydney. We don't know how he became part of the friend group or whatever. And he has left such a memorable, presence in people's minds ever since the 90s and everything. And, it's crazy. He's one of the most beloved characters. And he was only really in 2 movies and a cameo in the third. But, since then, they have tried to replicate him. And it's really tricky. Sometimes if you go too far, it can be cringy. If you don't go far enough, it can be kind of bland and a little boring. And, there's been several Randy knockoffs. And this is what I'm gonna do, a ranking video. I've been thinking long and hard about this. Now, I am gonna add a cheat from a character who was never part of the Scream franchise, but is technically a Randy knockoff in a completely different franchise. And so, first, let me remind everybody just kind of who Randy was. Randy was part of the original movie. He was part of the Friends group, and he had a crush on Sydney. He was a lovable dork, a nerdy little guy who really, really, really loved horror movies. And he would every scene he was in, he always ate up and stole. And so he was there for comedic relief, but he was also there for meta commentary. See, Randy was the type of person who was so obsessed with horror movies that he can pretty much explain all the rules of 80s and 70s slasher movies. And when the events of Ghostface started to happen in Woodsboro, it started to trigger his memories of those slasher movies, to where he will always rattle off the rules of a slasher movie, or certain events or certain characters, this and that, and what movie they was from. But of course, his infamous scene is the house party when he told us the rules. It was the most slap in the face thing anybody has ever seen. And I don't think it was ever done before. And so it is literally the most meta of meta things anywhere I can think of, and kind of Hollywood for the most part. Well, no, there's been other things, but at least things that I've seen, I guess you could say. Now, the thing about him is that he knew for a fact he was not living in a slasher movie. But when Casey Becker and Stu Orff ended up dead, he started him and his friends were talking about it, and they started bringing up about what the cops asked you, do you hunt, and this and that, and they were starting to explain why, and then they started rattling off serial killers from horror movies. Then somewhere in the movie, he was talking to Stu, and he basically, after Sydney got attacked by Ghostface for the first time, and she described, what he looks like and this and that, it triggered like his fascination and memory of like slasher movies. He was a costume villain chasing around young teens and killing them. And he basically tells Stu if the cops were smart, they would suspect everybody and everything and not just certain people. Because in a slasher movie, you truly have no idea who it is. Then, and like, when they was at the party and everything, somebody didn't know the rules of a slasher movie, which rules have never truly been like explicitly stated, and defined and everything. There's been several slasher movies of the 70s and the 80s, but was there ever a formula? And yes, there was. And so this is when he started rattling off the rules, and it was the coolest moment ever. And so in the second movie, he became a very chill type person. Kind of strange, a little dorky, and a little emo-ish kind of hipster. And he still talks about movies and everything, but not so much just like horror movies, but other kind of movies as well. And so, Dewey asked him, like, who do you think the killer is and this and that. And so he starts to talk about the rules of a sequel and everything. Since the first movie and the characters based their killings off of like horror movies and stuff. And so, but still, once again, he does not believe he's living in like a horror movie. It's just killers are playing by that rules. And so then in the third, in the cameo, he figured that, hey, this might not be over with, and that this could be a trilogy, and that whoever is, is behind these new killings, here are ways to like survive a horror movie. It was strange. It was weird that he would assume that somebody would be after Sidney again, but that was a great way of bringing him back into the movies, even though he is dead. And so since then, you've had so many knockoffs and everything. And this is how I'm going to rank the best knockoff. A Randy knockoff has to be, they have to know about slasher movies. They have to know about the rules. And they have to be like some type of like dork or a nerd or some type of comedic presence, something like that. And most importantly, they have to be unique. They have to be kind of like their own type of person and not just a complete carbon copy and everything. Like, that's the most frustrating thing of them all. Now, I must exclude somebody from the list. Beth, from Scream the television series season 3. Why? Well, she is the Randy of the show, kinda. She's a combination of Randy and Mickey because she's also the killer. She's a goth girl who knows about slasher horror movies, and she's the killer. But the reason why I am excluding her is for the sole reason I only have bits and pieces of the third season in my head. And I don't remember much about it. I remember the killers. I remember the final people. I remember certain events. And other little things like that. But I don't remember her specifically, other than the fact she's goth, she's a little moody, she's a killer. I forget her motive and everything. And like, I forget just how much of Randy is in her. So because I can't determine, like, it wouldn't be fair to put her on this list. So I must take her off until one day I'll be able to find season 3, which is near death impossible because it's on streaming sites I don't own, and you have to pay for individual episodes along with the streaming service. That is stupid. And it's like that with the other two seasons as well, which is why I don't talk about Scream, the television series, that much. Okay, so at the very bottom of this list, I must talk about Chandler. Now I know what you're saying. Who in the heck is Chandler? Well, she is my cheat. She is from Pretty Little Liars Original Sin slash Summer School. They had 2 seasons. The show is atrocious, and I ranted about both seasons and everything. Now, the reason why she is on this list is because of the simple fact she is a Randy knockoff, and more so than that, she is a Mindy knockoff. And the second season of Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, that was called Summer School, she acts more like Mindy than she does Randy. But she acts a bit more like Randy a little bit in the first season, but she's also can be a pretty dramatic character. Now, one thing is interesting about Chandler. So Roberto Sakawa, I'm saying his name wrong. Roberto Akira Sakaska, something like that. The dude who made The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and Riverdale. If you've ever heard me talk about this guy, then you know for a fact I cannot stand this man. He is the worst showrunner in history, next to that woman who did I Know What You Did Last I Know What You Did Last Summer, a television series, and Cruel Intentions. She did both shows and they suck. And so those two are like two of the worst showrunners I've ever seen. And so even though Riverdale lasted for many seasons and so did Sabrina, those shows still suck. Anyway. And he ruined Pretty Little Liars too. So the thing about this dude is that he has no originality in his head. He always copies other properties, or he just reboots already established IPs and everything. And when it comes to Pretty Little Liars Original Sin, he went the slasher movie route. The first season was kind of a little bit more like Michael Myers type thing. But the second season, he basically ripped off the Scream movies. I ranted about it. It pissed me off. It annoyed me. I hate it. And one of the people from the Scream franchise he ripped off was Randy / Mindy. Now, when you look at Chandler, she has some similarities to Mindy. She's black, light skin, most likely mixed or something like that. And she has long curly hair. That's just on the visual side. Now, that's just a coincidence because of the simple fact both Scream 5 and Pretty Little Liars Original Sins came out in 2022, but several months apart, about 6 or so. So Roberto did not have a chance to see Mindy in the movie, copy her visual and everything, and put it on this actress. No. So he based Chandler off of Randy's personality. Because Chandler is always sprouting off the rules and everything of like slasher movies, and always bringing up like just movies in general and the characters and how they relate to whatever it is going on in that episode. And she did that a lot in the first season. It wasn't that bad, but it was still just kind of a little bit cringy because you were just kind of like, why is she acting like Randy? And this is not Scream. But like, she is a huge movie buff in general. By the second season, which I did not finish and everything, but I saw enough of it to cringe myself out. By the second season, Chandler had fully become Mindy from Scream 6. Now, by that time, Scream 6 came out in 2023. And Roberto had plenty of time to check out Scream 6 and copies Mindy's newer personality that was over the top cringe of Randy. And so Pretty Little Liars, now called Summer School, it came out in the second season came out in 2024. And this time Chandler is like 100 times more Randy than she was in season 1. Every little instance that happens in the show, she's all like, oh, this is from this movie. This is from this movie. Oh, you're just like this character. These are rules of a blah, blah, blah. This is how we can determine who the killer is. And, this person is a suspect. And it was just way too over the top, and they made it way too comedic, and it became way too cringy in everything. And since she is basically a carbon copy clone of both Randy and Mindy, this is why she's at the bottom. So next on my list, and actually from a Scream franchise, is Mindy herself. The reason why Mindy is so low at the bottom has nothing to do with performance, but it has to do with the fact that for the most part, the only originality that Mindy has is that she's female, she's black, she's a lesbian, she gets the girl at the end, and that's about it. Other than that, she is legit a carbon copy of that of Randy, and with no other distinct trait that makes her different. See, in Scream 5, they just rebooted the first movie, so they needed a Randy, and they based his personality completely on her. But she's not dorky, nerdy like him. Because he's just like a dork. A little bit of a loser dork. She's a little bit more of a cool dork and everything. But she was more chill in Scream 5. However, come Scream 6, they went over the top with her. She was way too freaking meta and everything. By this time, they was no longer copying her beat by beat of Randy from the first movie. Now they just went overboard to the point where in the 5th movie, you do start to wonder, does Mindy assume she's actually living in a horror movie? Sometimes you can't tell, but by the 6th movie, I think it's pretty evident that she does think that she is, in fact, her and everybody else is living in a horror movie. And it's to the point where when she's explaining the new rules of whatever type of movie they're in, she just has her hands wide open with a gleeful look on her face, talking about, we're in a franchise and everything. And it's just like, what? And it's just one movie reference after another that she sprouts off. And the problem with that is that when Randy did it, it was about what exactly they were talking about. When they were talking about serial killers, they was sprouting off famous serial killers in movies. When he explained the rules, it's because somebody legit didn't know the rules. When she does it every time, it's just she does it because she literally thinks she's in a horror movie and crap. And it comes off super cringy. And I can't stand that. If they would have made her a little bit more like they did in the 5th movie, that would have been a bit better. But by that 6th movie, they just went overboard. And then by the 7th movie, there's basically none of it. They just water her down so much that she's almost a non-existent person for what she used to be. She's like a shell of her former self. And that's because of the backlash that her character got from the 6th movie and stuff. Now, this next entry, I had a hard time with this next spot because I kept going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I decided, you know what? I'm just going to combine these three because of the simple fact, when you pay close attention to the movie, all three of these characters, Charlie, Kirby, and Robbie, they all have distinct personality traits of Randy split into all three of them, which is really interesting and really fascinating. It's almost like Kevin Williamson couldn't decide on who the new Randy should be, so he decided to put certain traits of Randy in each three of these characters. But the one trait that they all have in common is that they're huge movie buffs and everything. Two of them can explain the rules, and they also, know a lot about movie history, mostly the stab movies in particular. But one of them, Kirby, she just knows horror movies and stuff. And so that's really interesting and really fascinating in my opinion. Now also, of course, Charlie is more like Mickey and Stu, because of the simple fact he is one of the killers. Now, what puts them higher on the list is just how different they are from Randy, despite being similar, and how they're somewhat more unique in their own way. And the thing about all three of them is that they always have to play off the other character, because individually, alone by themselves, they're kind of boring and somewhat can be a little cringe or a bit irritating. But when they're paired with one another, they always bring out the best in the other person. So you have that of the first one, Charlie. He is kind of like this somewhat quiet, reserved, almost emo-ish type character, which, Randy has traces of emo-ness in him. And the thing about Charlie is that he knows a lot about the stab movies and stuff. But what makes him different is that he's not always comparing everything to a horror movie or a horror movie character and stuff. He has kind of this almost it's not so much a loner boy, but kind of a coolness to him, with the long shaggy hair, the way he dresses, that sometimes when he's a bit more reserved, you know what I'm saying? You kind of wonder about him, but I never stop to think about, oh, he might be the killer, you know what I'm saying? And so, because he's not overly comedic, he has a little bit of comedic tone in him, but it's more of a serious, not so much a deadpan humor, but a slightly more serious kind of way. And the fact that he's in some type of AV club and, and he does chase after the girl, but he also gets the other girl. But it's kind of like when he snaps, that is completely different, because when he snaps, it's not in a big, overly comedic kind of way. Kirby is a nice, Randy clone, in the sense that throughout the entire movie, you never guess she's into horror movies. This comes as a complete surprise in the third act, when she starts rattling off, her knowledge of horror movies. She is a huge nerd when it comes to horror movies, but she doesn't want nobody to know. Now, Charlie is also a nerd, but not an overly, dorky kind of nerd. And so with Kirby, she of course is like a split between Randy and that of Tatum. She's rude, she's sarcastic, she's mean, but she's also a nerd and everything. So it's like, okay, cool. You got this really cool type of nerd that, like, is her own character and not silly dorky and comparing everything to a horror movie. Then you have Robbie, because you need that dorky, silly, over the top type, like campy nature of Randy. And that's where he comes in. He knows a lot about the stab movies. He also has he live streams everything with a little recording device on his head, which is something completely different from Randy. And not only that, but like he knows a lot about the stab movies and he can rattle off like the rules. That's something Kirby doesn't do. She doesn't explain the rules. It's mostly that of Robbie, and then Charlie will chime in and complete like his sentence and everything. He is that of a dork. And it's like, he has that part of Randy. If he was, but he's over the top silly, but not the kind of way Randy was like silly. You know what I'm saying? Randy was more silly in like a live stand-up comedian type way, whereas Robbie is just like funny in he's a dork. you know. Coming in at number 2 is Mickey. I know what you're saying. Like, if he's at number 2, who the heck is number 1? Because you're almost out of like options and stuff. Now, to be fair, Randy was in Scream 2, as was Mickey. Mickey technically is the copycat version of Randy in that movie, like a legit copycat, because the whole rules of like, that sequel was they was copying the first, the killer and stuff, right? Like the characters from the first like movie. However, even though he is a carbon copy of Randy, similar to that of Mindy, well, actually, because they're both like the copies of like from the first movie, he's completely different from Mindy. First things first, he's not overly cringy with like his movie knowledge. He knows for a fact he is not living in a horror movie, but he wants certain aspects of life to play out, like what would happen in the aftermath if a killer survived and had to go to trial. And so that makes him completely different from like everybody else. He knows his movie history because he's always sprouting off like movie knowledge and like movies that are non-horror related. And that right there what set him apart from like Randy. Randy, you could assume, could be a killer because he knows a lot about horror movies. Mickey, on the other hand, never talks about horror slasher movies. He just talks about movies in general, like sci-fi or like a western or something like that, or like a military action movie. So he has the movie knowledge that makes him similar to Randy, and he has a kookiness to him, but his kookiness is not a dorky kookiness like that of Randy. His is completely like a cool guy. Like he's in between the middle of like a dork and like a cool guy, but he's more leaning towards cool. He could get the girl if he wanted, but he doesn't chase after one and everything. He could literally fit into any type of friend group because he has like, that cool factor to him. And so that's what makes him like a really, really good version of like a Randy clone, to where he is similar to Randy, but not exactly like him and stuff. And also he is a killer. So he is similar to that of Stu. So coming in at number 1, in my opinion, the most perfect carbon copy clone of Randy is Noah from the first 2 seasons of Scream, the television series. Noah is about as unique and similar to that of Randy as possible. If you ever watched the Scream television series, then you know for the simple fact, duh, it's a television series and not a movie. And so, like, when it comes to Noah, not only does he have the movie trivia, he has the TV trivia as well. And that what really sets him apart from like Randy. Not only that, but he has his own podcast. And in his podcast, and you gotta remember, this was way before they became very popular on YouTube and stuff. He has a true crime podcast where he's always talking about serial killers and everything and their motives and what causes them to do what they do. So, in a sense, he is like Randy. He can sprout off like, I'm getting tongue-tied. He can sprout off like the rules of like a horror movie, and also has that movie trivia. But he can also sprout off the rules of a television show and like, you know, TV series, and he can sprout off the rules of a serial killer because of his like true crime podcast and stuff like that. So it gives him a far more edge over any other character that's a Randy knockoff. Because in the Screen television show, he talks about how like in the horror movie they're fast paced and you have to get right to like the point. But in a television show, you have to like stretch it out. You have to have the tropes. You have to have the drama and everything. And he literally like says that crap. Like, you know, he's telling us the rules of a television series drama and everything. Which horror television shows are very, very rare and everything. He is a dork and a nerd like that of Randy, but he's not the comedic nerd or dork. He's just more of kind of like, okay, he's smart in a geeky kind of way, but not in a scientific geeky kind of way. Like he's smart in like movie trivia, this and that. He's the scaredy cat. He is kind of like the guy who you never would think be able to get the girl, but he's able to get 2. But he has a hard time because he is that nerd and nobody looks at him in a like dating kind of way, you know? So for the simple fact that he has a quirk to him, but not an overly silly, humorous quirkiness to him. They could have made him exactly like Randy, like, you know, the very, very, very comedic vibe of Randy, but they didn't. He never comes off cringy and everything. And so if you're gonna make a clone version of a character, make it more modern and everything. Like, you know, the times of Randy have like, well, they could still stay, but for the most part, you want to have something that's more in line with how like, you know, a person acts today, and especially in modern television. And Noah was that perfect character, in my opinion. It's really weird because they really could have went that overly comedic route with say like Robbie, or that overly comedic cringy route with Mindy. And if they would have done that, it would have made the television show into a comedy, and the television show wanted to be more serious and not have that humor like the Scream movies did. So yeah, that's my ranking of like all the Randy clones in the Scream franchise, and that one from Pretty Little Liars. I do wonder when they make the 8th movie, who's gonna be the Randy clone in that? Like, is it still gonna be Mindy? Will she still be there or not? Or would it be a completely different character? how far or how little will they go with that character. And it would be so cool if like they can do something more similar to that of Noah when they make their brand new, like, you know, Randy character. Alrighty, well, I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.